So let's bring in Samuel Greene, professor in Russian politics at King's College London and co-author of the book Putin versus the People, The Perilous Politics of a Divided Russia. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
So we don't know many details about this summit, but we do know that Russia's President Putin is getting a one-on-one meeting with President Trump without having to make any concessions and without having to meet with the leader of the country he invaded. But Trump is warning Putin of severe consequences if he doesn't end the war, while at the same time admitting he can't stop Putin from killing civilians. So what does Putin likely think about Trump's threat and, of course, this upcoming summit that's being arranged just for him?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, this summit in a lot of ways is is a collection of sort of tactical victories for Putin. First of all, I mean, just about a week and a half ago, Putin was still very much in Trump's doghouse, right? We had ever since the NATO summit for about a month and a half been hearing consistent rhetoric from Trump about his frustration with Putin. That has flipped. Putin now looks like somebody projecting goodwill, somebody who again has Trump's confidence and is being welcomed in the United States. And that's the second tactical win, right? This is the United States, which under the Biden administration supported the International Criminal Court's warrant for arrest of Vladimir Putin on war crimes, clearly is not going to arrest Putin when he lands in Alaska. And so this makes it very clear that Putin has a seat at the global top table, that he's taken seriously and treated as a friend and as a partner by the president of the United States. And then the third win, again, is that, as you said, it's just going to be him and Trump. Putin's aim in all of this is to make a proposal that will be attractive to Trump and then to get Trump to sell that proposal, if not to use American leverage to actually enforce that proposal on the Ukrainians and on the Europeans more broadly, who of course have a much more immediate and material stake in the outcome of this war.
And President Trump has been talking about a possible land swap. But Ukraine's President Zelensky reaffirmed Wednesday at the European virtual meeting that he will not agree to giving up any Ukrainian land under his country's control. So what do you think this summit will achieve in the end?
Well, I think the idea of a land swap is premature on a couple of levels. First of all, that's the kind of thing you would expect to see, not as part of a ceasefire, but as part of a peace deal. And as Zelensky and everybody else has made clear, including really the Russians, there needs to be a ceasefire. First, you need to build confidence, you need to build security, and then you can talk about a lasting peace agreement. But it's also problematic because what Trump is suggesting is swapping Ukrainian land for other Ukrainian land, right? That's something that even if Ukraine were to countenance giving up some of its sovereign territory, that has to go through a referendum. That has constitutional consequences. That's not something that even Zelensky, as Ukraine's democratic elected president, is entitled to do on his own. So I really don't think that's likely to be seriously on the table. I think what will be on the table potentially is some kind of a freeze in the fighting, a freeze of the current front lines, with the caveat from Putin's point of view that there are no consequences to renewed Russian aggression. In other words, there's no European reassurance force, there's no no-fly zone, there's no real deterrence beyond maybe political deterrence and threats of renewed sanctions, which so far Russia doesn't take terribly seriously, in the event that Russia decides to start the fighting again. So in other words, a ceasefire that really leaves Russia very much in control of the escalational dynamics in the war.
And European leaders are, of course, concerned that Trump might be manipulated by Putin and influenced by Putin's goals and narrative. How likely is that, do you think?
Well, look, I can't get inside Trump's head. He's clearly, wedded to this relationship with Putin. Despite Putin's intransigence, that relationship was sufficient to allow this summit to take place again after about a month and a half of consistent frustration. So I don't know how much it is a question of being deceived, but he does see some common cause, and really he wants an end to this war. Not, I think, in an end in of itself, but as a way of getting back to sort of a normalized, friendly, as he sees it, relationship, not just between the United States and Russia, really, but personally between himself and Vladimir Putin. He sees that as a profitable political and maybe economic opportunity, and he sees the war, frankly, as a nuisance in the way of that.
Samuel Greene, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.